Hello, everyone. My name is James Swanson. I'm here representing the Harlequins Foundation. Thank you for joining us for what is another installment of our Quality, Diversity, Inclusion panel series. Today, we will be addressing sport and disability. Before I pass over to Nick Heath, who will be our expert moderator today, just want to say a massive thank you to all of our panelists for giving up their time, but also sharing their stories. So, Nick, over to yourself.
Thank you, James. Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for what should be a great hour's conversation as part of this Tackling Inequality series. And tonight's focus, sport and disability, language, opportunity, and what true inclusion looks like. Now, I'm honoured to be here in my capacity as Harlequins Foundation Ambassador. I really must hold a reception and serve some Ferrero Rocher soon. I work as a commentator in rugby and also as a journalist, so I'm hoping it'll be my inquisitive nature that helps us, well, listen and learn this evening from what is a tremendous panel of guests. Allow me to introduce them. You may have to do your own round of applauses here. We're getting used to this via Zoom. We have a double Paralympian from the London and Rio Games, presently training for Tokyo, from wheelchair rugby, and also a fellow ambassador. It's Kylie Grimes. Yay! Excellent. From Swim England, formerly of the RFU, a man who is passionate about mixed ability sport and its mainstream inclusion. Delighted to have Mike Hawkes with us. Hello, Mike. Good. Bringing in the Harlequins Sporting Connection. It's our Harlequins wheelchair rugby team captain from the Jesters, apparently motivated by being told she won't be able to do something. Well, tonight you won't be able to speak eloquently and brilliantly on our panel. It's Claudia Burrough. Woo! Thank you, Claudia. And our fourth guest is the current captain of England Deaf Rugby, also a development manager at the Rugby Players Association. He's also captained England at the World Deaf Sevens Championships in Sydney and led England to a series victory over New Zealand. It's Luke Cheyne. Well done, everybody. Good, good, good. Okay, just to let you all know that we would love to receive your questions over the course of the next hour. We will generate some conversation between ourselves. If your question is relevant as we go, I'll do my best to pick up on it and feed it into our panel discussion. It may be that we have a few that we come to at the end. So I shall prompt you as we go. But thank you so much for joining us here on your Monday evening. Yeah, well, welcome and good evening, everybody. Kylie, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good, good.
Glad to be here. It's going to be really interesting, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, let's hope so. And Mike, you well? Monday been good to you?
Yeah, all good, thank you. I just recovered from Saturday in the beer garden, so I'm feeling pretty great.
We're all remembering what that feels like, aren't we? Claudia, any ultra marathons recently?
No, not recently. I did a half yesterday, but no ultras recently.
Just a casual half, as you go. Luke, how are you?
Good, thanks, Nick. Yeah, pleasure to be on.
Excellent. Well, lovely to have you here. So, sport and disability, language, opportunity, and what true inclusion looks like to you. From my personal experience on the LGBTQ plus side that we've covered in a previous webinar, the use of language and education around that is hugely important. I think people can be worried about saying the wrong thing, and maybe because I guess sometimes trying to say the right thing from a position of not understanding or ignorance can rub people up the wrong way. I think I've lost count of the number of times very masculine men have shaken my hand after I let them know I was gay, as if I've won a competition. It's very nice, but it's not always entirely appropriate. So Claudia, I'd like to come to you first, if I may. I'm led to believe there's a sort of element around positive language around disability that can grate, where because of the challenges that you might face, you might be labelled as inspirational. How does that word make you feel?
Personally, I hate the word inspirational. I think it. Why are they calling me inspirational? I think is the issue. If potentially if they've read my story, they know about me, that maybe they know me and I do an event, then I think, and it inspires them to do something, then fine. Like inspirational is technically like being inspiring. That's a verb. You do something. But if I'm I don't know, I've been in the supermarket and I've reached up to get something out and I've like done it myself, and it's like, oh, you're so inspiring that you're out and you're living your life. Or I'm starting a race, they'll be like, oh, you're such an inspiration. I'm like, but you don't even know who I am. You're basing that purely on what you see as me as a wheelchair user. That's what that's basing it on, and that's why it annoys me immensely.
Yeah, I can understand. And I was watching, was it a link to Stella Young's TED Talk that you provided?
Yeah.
I was having a little watch of that earlier on, and it is very enlightening, where she talks about ultimately I'm making the best use of my body in the same way that anybody able-bodied is doing the same thing there, and that's sort of all wrapped up as part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think she talks about this concept around like inspiration porn, and disabled people are used as this kind of well, if they can do it, then so can you. But why? Like, I'm a person like everyone else, but I just have a slight difference. I can't use my legs. So there's the thing about, there's no amount of looking at a set of stairs is gonna get me up that set of stairs unless there's a lift. So no sort of, those, your no disability is a sort of bad thing, and just things like that just they're really annoying.
Yeah, I can sense that. I can sense where that is with you. Of course, there are times when I'd quite like to be called inspirational for just not doing a lot, particularly on a hangover. Maybe Mike was thinking that over the weekend on Sunday. If you managed to make some breakfast, I just want a medal for it. Kylie, talk to me about ableism, discrimination in favour of able-bodied people, and perhaps the role that language plays there.
Do you know, I'm probably a rare one with these sort of topics or this sort of thing, because I find it quite hard actually with a lot of disabled people, the way they deal with it. To me, I try to keep everything as positive as possible, as like, at the end of the day, everybody's learning, and I don't want to feel like somebody can't ask me a question, even if they get it wrong, or that they can't come and approach me with anything, because I'm happy to talk about every aspect of my life, because I want to educate, I want to learn about everyone as well, and how people feel and how they don't. Like, listening to Claudia there was amazing, because again, I have a slightly different opinion. That inspiration word doesn't faze me in the slightest. I can get her view on it when we don't do anything, like it's just being inspirational for sitting in your chair. Well, I'm kind of not, but at the same time I just laugh and shrug it off. But I do, I'm slightly different compared to a lot of people. This topic's come up quite a lot recently, especially during lockdown. A lot of disabled people are, to me, I see it as a bit whingy, the way they're doing it, but maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's just my take on it. But yeah, I just prefer, if I'm out and about and something's said in an ableist way, and like sort of towards me and being in a chair and towards disability and all that sort of thing, I will just bring them up on it, and I'll just kind of say, probably shouldn't say it that way, maybe rephrase it and have a think about how you've just like voiced that to me. But I'll always just try and be positive about it. Do you know what I mean? One thing I always think as well is I only had an accident in 2006, so 15 years ago, and so before that I spent 18 years of my life as an able-bodied person. So before my accident, I didn't know about disabilities. I didn't really know what it was like for the person in the chair or the people around them or everybody. So I probably would have said the wrong things, and they probably would have been really ableist, and I would have been like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. So yeah, for me, I get why it is hard, and I get why a lot of people would like to see change. Of course I do. But I just would really like to see it done in a very positive way, a good approach, and just, educate people, make a little bit of a joke about it. Don't be offended. If someone does it, I try not to like take it on board personally or anything like that. I just help them and say, maybe do it, think, open your mind, think another way.
And for those that are here and watching, what are the sort of ableist things that you would hear? What are these sort of triggers that can be frustrating? I just wanted to ask you that, Kylie, while you went back on mute. Oh,
sorry. Do you know what? I actually don't come across it very often, which is probably another reason why I'm not too concerned. When I'm out and about, I'm generally pretty confident. I'll talk to anybody and everyone, and I don't really get anything. But you do get the odd comment like, oh, it's nice to see you out, and tapping me on the shoulder and things like that. Or, oh, do you know, it's so hard off the top of my head, because I don't experience it. I see some people post about things and they're like, oh, this is an ableist comment. And I'm like, oh, wow, I've never had that. So it is really hard for me to understand sometimes, I guess, because I don't really get it. And yeah, the world within like wheelchair rugby, which I play, we're always constantly joking between each other and having banter and laughs. And, you know, none of us take offense to it because we're all just used to each other and stuff. Because that's the other thing that a lot of people don't like, is actually a lot of disabled people can say like negative things towards another disabled person and they don't like it. But within the world of wheelchair rugby, we kind of all joke. It is a big joke between us all anyway. And, you know, what we find not offensive, I guess some people do find quite offensive. And I wouldn't just go out and see someone in a chair and say it in public, because I don't know how it's going to affect them. You know, I do think about what I say. But when I'm with the boys and when I'm on the squad, we all do have a good laugh. So yeah, I guess I'm slightly different within the world that I live in. I don't get it so often, unfortunately.
I guess, you know, there's that element in all areas of equality, diversity, this sort of thing, where, yeah, among familiar people, familiarity, that kind of thing, we'll say an awful lot of things that wouldn't be the attitudes that probably we want, you know, the average person on the street to hear. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. I mean, Mike, I imagine the attitudes of language used around mixed ability sport can have a huge impact. I mean, language can be divisive, can't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think mixed ability sport, for those that don't know, involves disabled and non-disabled participants all playing together in a mainstream environment. So the whole ethos is we're just another team within the club. But that does mean language can be a bit of an interesting one sometimes. And it's certainly important. I think one of the main things that is important about language is that it can actually stop people engaging from the club, because they're so, I would say, in 100% of my experiences, the clubs I've been to have always been very supportive and very positive about mixed ability rugby, but they haven't always been engaged because they're so worried about saying the wrong thing. The easiest way to not say the wrong thing is not to say anything. So they just don't engage. Whereas, like Kylie said, if you give people a bit of freedom, obviously depending on the context, and you can tell that it's coming from sort of a positive way, and you can tell when someone's doing it because they start to trip over their words a bit and they're not too sure. And maybe if they're a little bit older, they might use the word handicapped, and they're not intentionally trying to be offensive in any way. It's just they're so worried about, if anything, they're going the other way. They're trying really hard not to offend. So I think we've got to sort of maintain a bit of perspective with that at a time. Like Kylie said, it's a case of, oh, well, we wouldn't necessarily use that word anymore. This is what we would use now. But with mixed ability, just the nature of it, and it's the same with any rugby team. When you get to know the people around you, and in my case it's a men's team, so when you get to know the lads around you, like, you start to take the mick out of each other a bit anyway, regardless of what the difference might be, and regardless of disability. Like, if someone drops the ball, I'm probably going to laugh at them, because that's what you do in a rugby team. That's part of the fun, is you're there with your mates to have a bit of a social. So I think if you can foster a positive environment, which is one of the reasons I love to play mixed ability rugby, is because of the environment, and you're usually on the right track in terms of language as well.
Yeah, and where you're talking about how language evolves in that sense, I mean, how does wider society get that memo? Because obviously there will be terms that come through disability and through sport as well, but where these terms will become outdated and where more modern approaches will be taken. How do you find it, or where are the challenges in terms of trying to get the evolution of language out to be able to help in a broader sense?
I think it's because people around the EDI space in general, language does evolve naturally, and things, like I say, that were fine 10, 15 years ago now just aren't fine. So when you start to talk about, well, this is the new terminology, you can see them thinking, oh, this again, because obviously the terminology has changed in the past. But with regards to terminology and language, it's the intent, it's the way you use it. And again, with mixed ability, with regards to disability, we always talk about the medical model versus the social model. So the medical model is obviously puts the onus on the individual. The disability is essentially their issue, and it's something that you can't impact as a coach or a fellow player. and therefore it's on them, and it makes it a very isolated and lonely position. When you look at the social model, it looks at the whole. It looks at this might be the difference that the individual has, but because society is set up in this way, and one of the real traditional ones might be a wheelchair user. The medical model would be that it's their fault that they're in a wheelchair. That's why they can't access the facility that they're trying to get into. It's their fault they can't go up the stairs. The social model would say, no, that's actually the facility's fault because they're not catering for the community in the way that they said they would. So they're not creating access, whether that's a ramp or whatever that may be. IMAS, the mixed ability organisation, will hate me using that example because they always say it's the traditional one and it's the easy one to use, but I'll apologise in advance for that. But yeah, generally, I think language is really, really important. And from an NGB point of view, so from an RFU point of view and from a community foundation point of view with people like Quins, then there's an opportunity for education there through various projects and just getting to know people, to be honest.
Yeah, excellent. And Luke, I think Mike talked about it there a bit in terms of the definition of the disability, where it might lie with the individual, and sort of talking about language in a different sense. You've obviously had wonderful opportunities and achieved great things through England Deaf Rugby, but I think you mentioned to James before and wanted to talk about a little bit about that aspect of, well, how deaf are you to be able to play in a team, and where that language piece in the sort of eligibility versus opportunity side comes in, and that spectrum of disability.
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of kind of going back to what the other guys have said, I think context is a really, really important point. I think going to your point around kind of how deaf are you to play, for me anyway, I've been kind of deaf in my left ear from birth, so I've never known anything different. If you were to look at me, you wouldn't see that, or you wouldn't see that I'm deaf, or I don't sound perhaps like I'm deaf, or I've got a speech impediment, or anything like that. But I think one of the things I mentioned to James as well is that there's often a fair bit of, I say discrimination. Maybe discrimination is not the right word, but perhaps lack of awareness even within the deaf community around how disabled you must be to qualify to be disabled, if that makes sense. And I see the other guys kind of nodding now, and so for me, example, I don't rely on British Sign Language as my main form of communication. A lot of my teammates don't either. Even many of those who are far more deaf than I am. If we have to measure deafness by a kind of a figure, as an example, but then there's many people that, well, hang on a minute, you don't sign, you don't sound deaf. You don't rely on sign language to communicate, so you're not deaf. Do you know what I mean? So in the same way of, that the idea of a disabled person being somebody in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And actually how someone in a wheelchair, or how two different people in a wheelchair may deal with their disability. I kind of look at kind of disability sometimes. I'd say this to James is a bit of a strange word, because I, in many ways, kind of flipping it back onto what you said previously, Nick, I look at my disability, if you like, or my lack of hearing as something that has given me a fantastic opportunity that otherwise I'm not too proud to suggest that I would have played for England had I not been playing for England deaf. My dad would probably say, of course you would, son, but for me, I know for a fact that I wouldn't have played for the senior England side. So for me, actually being deaf or having a level of deafness has created some fantastic opportunities. And so, kind of from a language point of view, he's kind of looking at that from a positive perspective. I think awareness is really, really important as well. And Kylie touched on it in terms of the banter and the jokes that kind of go on within her environment. It's the same for me. I play for a non-deaf club side. Have done since the age of kind of 5 or 6. So I'm known within that club as, Luke who's deaf, or not necessarily Luke who's deaf, but people are aware of my lack of hearing. And so, when we're in those familiar environments, there's always deaf jokes, but it's done. I see it from a how it's given, which is a place of kind of endearment in many ways. The lads that will make a joke, knowing full well that I will take it as a joke, because they know me as a person, not as a deaf person.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and so therefore, I'm sensing, we all there've been stories that you've each said, I think, that suggest that the familiarity in that side of things is is bringing about the more friendly environments, but that is the language we're talking about, therefore, where it's people that don't understand, that are not people that are related to you, that is wider society. Would that be about right?
I think for me, if I can just jump in, I think absolutely. I think it comes back to the awareness, and I think if if language is inappropriate, or certain language which is used is inappropriate and comes from a negative place, then there's an issue. There's probably a bigger issue at play there than actually the language being used. I think and Mike mentioned the whole idea of kind of sometimes people tripping up their own kind of words sometimes when they're trying to not be offensive. I think from my point of view, I've always tried to take the kind of the ground of not being offended, because there's a lot of people in kind of society, disabled or non-disabled, who can be very the term flaky is snowflake is used quite a lot now, rightly or wrongly. But I think people can often look for ways to be offended. If that makes sense. So I think from my point of view, the way I've always looked at it is kind of recognizing where it's coming from, and if it's coming from a discriminatory or a prejudicial way, then there's an issue, rather than just somebody trying not to be offensive.
Yeah, offence is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I think it is all about, as you say, the intent. Because I think there can be people that have decided that something is intended for them when it wasn't, and can decide to be offensive. I think Stephen Fry made some sort of comment years ago, oh, you're offended, are you? Excellent. Well, feel free to go and sit over there and be offended. It makes no difference to me whatsoever. It's an emotional state you have, you have almost chosen to have in this particular environment. Kylie, how do you look at an opportunity where disability is concerned? Because I imagine with the profile of an Olympian, do you get opportunities to be a bigger voice for change and awareness?
Yeah, I think so, especially a lot this year. I've really got involved with certain things, Again, not everyone agrees with my opinion, because I'm quite chilled out about the whole thing. I always have been. I'm never offended by anything, and I don't really want to be. I choose not to be, and I really want to educate. That's how I see it. I've always been like that. If they heard some of the jokes between the boys and I, it would probably be shocking to some people. But yeah, just when I'm out and about, the same thing really. I choose not to be offended. I try and educate always and just make people aware. And like Mike said earlier, language changes massively. Like I go to America to play with the boys and they still say handicapped, and I'm a bit like, ooh, that word's not what we use, but it's fine, they use it over here. And the same with Luke. Like, disability to me, I say the word disabled and I call myself, if I'm talking to someone, I'm disabled, I'm a wheelchair user. They're the sort of words I use, but I do not see myself really as disabled, which is quite funny considering I've got a very high level spinal injury. I'm paralysed from the chest down and my hands don't work properly. So I actually have, a high level disability, to be quite honest. But I don't see myself as disabled. Over the years, I've achieved so many things. I really am proud of what I've done since my injury. And yeah, it's given me, again, just because I broke my neck and I had an accident, which for some people would turn their lives completely upside down, I saw it as an opportunity straight away to, be in that Paralympic Games, which I had a dream from a very, very young age of doing. And, maybe I wouldn't have been an Olympian. Maybe I would have been like Luke and not been quite as good, to make the Olympic team. So to be able to be a Paralympian because of my disability is unbelievable, and I am so proud. So yeah, because of everything I've done, I do see huge opportunities and ways that we can all help massively and use our roles within our sports to just really educate and guide. But really also for me, I'm trying to send a big message that I really don't mind any question being asked in any way, and if it's wrong, or you believe it's wrong, I'd rather you still say it to me, and I will, I'll tell you how to change it for next time, and say someone else might not really like that, so I'd word it differently. But yeah, I really want to get that across, because at the end of the day, if we want to see change, and we want everything to be inclusive to everybody, and we want to see out and about things more accessible, we have to be open and honest, because it's got to come from us, I believe. Yeah,
very good. I sort of was thinking about, you you've made it sound like it's just something in your life that is part of your life journey, and therefore you are cracking on regardless. And I guess in that sense, I wonder if I could say someone that suffers a bereavement at a young age, or any of these kind of big life things that can impact us. You're probably someone that says, yeah, and you tuck that under your arm and you just keep going. I mean, do you find that you are talking to people that may be recently disabled, or perhaps have had more longer term conditions, and are actually, your positivity is useful to rub off on them and go, well, what else are you going to do? You're either going to sit and mope about it, or we've got to crack on here.
I really do hope so. I've been speaking to a lot of guys who are newly injured, also been injured a long time, who've reached out to me a lot in lockdown, and said that your videos, what you're doing, how you show that you're getting on with your daily life, your transfers, everything I've been putting out there, they're like, you are helping me so much, and you've realised that actually I can do a lot. When you're in rehabilitation, when you have something like a spinal injury, unfortunately, it's the way it is, but you get told a lot by the nurses and the doctors that you probably won't do this and you probably won't do that, because they have to be realistic. I looked at them that day that I had my accident and I said, you don't know me, and I will be doing all of this and I will do everything. And my spinal injury is part of my life, but it will not control my life. And that is how I see it. Of course I have good days, of course I have bad days like everybody, but to be honest with you, my bad days are generally life related, like I've got to pay a bill or some other rubbish. It's not generally because of my spinal injury. But yeah, I do believe I'm helping a lot of people that are newly injured. I really hope I am. I would like them to see their potential always. It doesn't matter what your ability or disability is. I believe everybody's got potential. So yeah, I'm trying my hardest to help.
Very good. It's very good. Well, I think it's infectious. And Claudia, I mean, I'm sort of coming off the back of what Kylie said. I'm gonna challenge perhaps you can keep the word, you can throw the word inspirational into room 101 if you want to, but there's a little crossover here I'm feeling, which is that to be able to have that attitude from any life experience can feel quite impressive, can feel inspirational, because of how someone is choosing to move forward, whatever might be happening in their life. And they could be a single parent, they could be having cancer treatment, they could, whatever it might be. So do you find that a little bit like what I was asking Kylie about there, that actually if you're in a position to be able to help other wheelchair users or other people who've recently suffered a disability to continue, that actually there's an element of imparting that can-do attitude that can be helpful, that needs to sort of give them that sense of, well, you can crack on too, and that is a good quality to have.
Definitely. I think like when I first became a wheelchair user, I found that actually I thought I was coping with it quite well, and it was the people around me, so like my dad and my friends, that were almost reacting like it was the end of the world. And quite quickly, I mean, yeah, I was struggling, but it was a case of, okay, well, I need to be okay, because if I show that I'm okay with everything, then they'll come along with me on that, because I don't want them, like wallowing in like what's happened to me. So it was kind of, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go and do that half marathon I'd planned to run. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to show you that actually everything is okay, and like wider family kind of jump on board with that. But I do think definitely helping. Like, I think you read a lot, and I agree with what Kylie's saying. I think you see a lot of people that have like maybe been wheelchair users or had their disability for a long time, and they're like, oh, it's all fine, like everything's great. And I think when you first start, you do go through, when you first become a wheelchair user, you do go through kind of that peak and like trough of how it feels, and it is quite hard. And I kind of, when I saw things, I was like, oh, it's not okay. Like, what am I going to do? I can't run anymore. I can't play sport like I used to. But actually, so it is hard to start with, but you do come out the other side. And I think that's what it's showing the journey. And actually, it's okay that you're struggling, but you will get to a point where it just becomes normal. I mean, kind of quite similar, but I forget that I'm a wheelchair user, which it sounds insane, but I forget that. That's the case, because I mean all I'm doing is sitting down and pushing myself, but mean, we were in like a queue for like a supermarket, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic when you queued for miles, and then the security guard was like, you can go to the front. I was like, why? And then my friend who was with me just went, because they think you're incapable. And I was like, yeah, okay, fine. I was like, no, I think I'll wait here and queue like everyone else. Like, why did I need to go to the front of the queue? And I appreciate that there will be people who couldn't stand for very long in the queue and that they would need to go to the front of the queue. But I just completely like didn't realize why they were asking me. And it just, because it comes normal in the same way that you don't think about walking, I don't think about pushing. It's just normal for me. So yeah, I do hate the inspiring word still, but I think it's, if I'm inspiring someone to do something, if they're doing something or they're learning or there's something happening, I think it's just that if someone's looking at me and they like, whether, you know, in the supermarket, or I'm just literally doing something so normal that if there was a non-disabled person there doing it, then they wouldn't say anything because they wouldn't even like acknowledge it. But because I'm doing that, I'm inspirational. I think inspiring, I like inspirational, which just is a go-to in every sort of disability article that's written by, I don't want to say an uneducated person, but someone that's not maybe had that experience, I think is where I'm just like, oh, and my friends comment on my posts and I'll be like, so inspirational, because they it just winds me up. But yeah.
Are they doing it to wind you up now?
Yeah, they definitely do it. If I finish a race, I'm like, oh, so inspirational.
Excellent. Good. I actually wanted to ask you as well, Claudia, about sort of to put your EDI hat on, because I know you do, you know, equality, diversity, and inclusion work, and with governing bodies and organisations. Is that right? I wondered in a 2021 world where we can see more organisations, companies, governing bodies, people in sport wanting to do more, wanting to have more voices on the various areas of EDI that there are. Have you found that disability is competing for space in some other areas of EDI that may be coming up and getting more real estate in this kind of landscape?
Yeah, I do see that. And this is obviously nothing against, you know, things like the Black Lives Matter movement, but that is, people are now saying like equality and diversity, and what they're actually saying is like race and like maybe like religion, and that's, they're not covering all aspects of what equality, diversity, and inclusion is. So you'll see like groups set up off the back of Black Lives Matter and protests, and I think that's good. It's a right step. But as long as organisations aren't focusing solely on like one aspect, it needs to be sort of everyone that falls under those sort of the Equality Act banner. You know, everyone needs to be represented, and potentially people also that don't fall under that banner, so that it's kind of, you get two sides. Because I think you can go quite heavy on the EDI stuff, and you're like, well, we're going to do this, but you're not considering how like maybe outside of that group views that.
Yeah, we actually, when I was helping England Touch devise an EDI piece just to sort of demonstrate the work that the working group were going to do and why England Touch thought it was a really good organisation, we showed it to a sort of control few people, a nice little film that we've done, and there were some incredibly supportive, thoughtful men in their 40s and 50s who were white, middle-class, heterosexuals, and they watched, you know, the various people from different religious backgrounds, sexuality, gender, everything within this film, showing how we wanted to improve the diversity. And they were like, this is great. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to say anything. I don't know how to support. And it is interesting. You have to do the work on the EDI, but also make sure that then conversely, you're not leaving traditional audiences or traditional participants aside. It's a constantly evolving thing, isn't it? Did you want to respond to that? Sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I agree. It's that because people on committees know what they know, and you'll also find that on committees, people have come with their background and their knowledge, and they'll be pushing their side of things, but actually it doesn't necessarily fit with another person's aspect. And you get that even if you're there to represent disability. Like, yes, I'm a disabled person, but I don't know everything about disability. You know, I don't have a vision impairment, or, you know, I don't know. So it's, and even then you can struggle with like what you might do, you know, for someone who's deaf versus someone that's got like a visual impairment. So you're always balancing, and I'm not the front of all knowledge. Like I don't have all the answers.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And we've got a couple of questions, which I'll get to in just a second. I mean, talking about equality, diversity and inclusion, Mike, the area of inclusion is a big one for you, isn't it, with the mixed ability space? And I think you may have been doing a dissertation on trans inclusion in sport, but you've got insight from netball on the inclusion side related to hand signals. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Claudia in terms of things are prioritised at the moment, and it's a very, very difficult one. So my job role with Swim England, the Amateur Swimming Association, is EDI, and around that you've got to prioritise based on, I suppose, what the focus is at the moment, where the opportunities are, and the provision that's already provided. But it does mean that some groups don't necessarily get the attention that they need. So, and I'm not going to pan the RFU. I worked with them for a while. I absolutely love them. I think they're great. But for example, their newest diversity working group doesn't represent disability in any way. And that's fine if that's, I mean, it's not fine at all. But they've set out their priorities, and this is what their priorities are. And that's on the basis, I'm sure, of what provision they already provide. Now, I'm guessing, and this is putting words in their mouth, that they've seen that they've got wheelchair rugby. Mixed ability rugby is growing quite well still across the country, and you've got teams like England Deaf at that more performance end that showcase that they are showing support in that area. But it is difficult because my main passion area is around disability, and my main experiences over the last 6 or 7 years have been with disability. For it not to get represented in that way. Sorry, what was the question again? I was about to get my high horse there, but
well, it was around the sort of your experiences of inclusion. I mean, it's interesting you say that, because actually when they named the panel, I had a couple of people contact me from my LGBT background and go, "Have we got one of ours on the panel?" And it's and you know, and so you do have this thing where everybody's sort of wanting to look after their own troop with EDI. Yeah. Interestingly, you know, gay and inclusive clubs has been a term for a number of years. So then inclusion has become this sort of byword for gay or you know, gender areas, gender diversity. So then, you know, when I started working on a working group for England Touch, you could see people's minds being gently blown as you started to say, well, actually inclusion is about the person with learning difficulties. It's about the person that might have a disability. It's about the gay guy. It's about the non-binary person. It could be about the person that just can't afford, but is massively talented and wants to play in the sport, and we're going to need to support financially. And that's the inequality that they've got. And you could just see people going, oh, this is a lot bigger than just, you know, advertising in GAY. And, you know, so not to say that comment was made, I should say, on behalf of England Touch to defend them, because we've made some amazing progress. But it's an example of the kind of thing I think that you can come across. So, yeah, I was interested on the netball side, how you worked in terms of, I think Jane mentioned that there was a hand signals tale.
Yes, I'm not going to take any credit from England Netball, because they did it, but they were looking into netball with people with a hearing impairment, and I met with them just to have a bit of a chat and a catch up, and they mentioned that they'd been doing this and it had gone really well, and they developed, I think it was either hand signals or flags to essentially showcase the calls that were being made on court. I'm not going to pretend I know what those calls are, but they were netball calls. And I thought, oh, that sounds really, really good. And in my head, what I thought was, oh, are you going to start implementing that in your officials courses? Because at the end of the day, if you know the rules of netball, if you're shouting something, equally you can still use a flag at the same time, and therefore netball is then more inclusive to everyone. Whereas they were going the way of, and again, I'm not criticising because this was insight-led in their case, they were going the way of, well, no, for deaf netball, we'll use these hand signals. And to me, that seems like a missed opportunity for mainstream inclusion. And I saw a very similar thing on LinkedIn recently, and people post obviously lots of interesting stuff on there sometimes. Someone had done a Rubik's Cube for people with a visual impairment. So rather than colours, all of the sides had Braille on it. But the Rubik's Cube was white all over. And I just thought, why have you done that? Because you could have Braille on there and the colours. I don't understand why you've made something. I mean, what you've done is good, but it could be usable for a lot more people and more mainstream inclusion, just to look at what does the Rubik's Cube currently look like? How can we tailor that? Well, we could put Braille on these sides and it could work for everyone. Yet we seem to make these sort of quite siloed projects or programs that cater to one really specific demographic. But then once you've done that, where's the sustainability? Because unless endless funding exists, which it doesn't, we all know that with sport, things tend to get passed on to clubs. Unless it sits within the existing structure, and the existing structure is there to be tweaked, but there is a structure there nevertheless, then it just doesn't work. And that for me is my sort of attitude is when we're creating anything, and that's why I think that's why I'm such an advocate of mixed ability rugby, is because it fits within the club structure, but it develops the club that it's within. It allows them to actually improve based on the club that's there or the team that's there.
I've got an everyday supermarket version of that, which is the fact that my husband is vegan and gluten free, so he can go and pick up the vegan burgers, but they put flour in them. Why not just make them gluten free as well? You know, just you know, it's not quite the same, but.
You could be onto something there, though, Nick.
What was that?
You could be onto something there, though, mate.
You know, you're already going niche, so why not make it more inclusive if you're going niche? This is the whole thing. Because we were talking, Mike, earlier about the language thing, and with Luke about sort of joking amongst friends, I can see that John Hartley's put a question through. Does the joking amongst friends not perhaps encourage others present who may not be as close friends to think that that sort of language might be acceptable in other situations? How would you respond to that?
I think within a club environment and within a team environment, to say we get new players down, which we do semi-regularly, they'll see quite clearly that it's quite an informal environment and that the way that we're speaking is between friends. Equally, and I think I read Jamie's as well, and I know you'll come on to that, but we don't belittle them for their disability. That's not what it is at all. It's in the same way that one of my players, and he'll love me saying this, one of the guys I coached relentlessly takes the mick out of me because I'm bald. I will give him a bit of stick back as well, but the people will be able to see that there's a dynamic there, that it is a joke. And I think it would be quite rare. I can't see it happening, to be honest. Someone coming down to a session, seeing how we interact together and it being quite positive, and then them thinking, oh, I'm going to go and speak to everyone like that. Like Kylie said around context, is the way that she speaks to the people on our team. She might not go up to someone in the street and speak to them in the same way, but we would do that regardless of disability with mates. I'd be quite offended if someone came up in the street and slapped me on the head, but Ben does that pretty much every week. So these are the sort of things around communication. We wouldn't ever belittle them for their disability. There's actually an acceptance that everyone is different, and that's why rugby lends itself so well to mixed ability and disability sport. So yeah, it's tone, and again, it's context. There isn't sort of a set line, but I would just say you would know. It's, people often say when you do some education, they go, oh, that's just common sense, and it really is at times. It really is common sense. So that's how I'd reply to that.
Yeah, who needs enemies when you've got teammates like that, eh?
Yes, exactly.
Luke, I mean, inclusion is one thing. I think allyship is also part of this picture. Is that an area that you see growing around deaf rugby and disability, perhaps in your work with the RPA?
How do you mean in terms of?
Well, players, allies who may obviously not be in these areas, who are looking to learn more about it or to feel that they can be a voice to support.
Yeah, definitely. I think it in many ways, it kind of intertwines with the last point that Mike's just made there, and it kind of comes back to the culture of sport or kind of the organisation that you're kind of involved with. And I look back at, or I mentioned the point about teammates of mine and friends of mine, making jokes. Again, context is very much what it is. It's not the same in two separate situations. That's why, that's the whole point of context. So I think that's a very, very important aspect of it. But it comes back to awareness again. Disabled, non-disabled, tall, short, thin, fat. There's 8 billion odd people in the world, and no two of us are exactly the same. And so I think that if we can, maybe it's kind of like a romantic ideology that we can all kind of get along and live peacefully and happily ever after. And obviously reality doesn't necessarily always work like that. But from my perspective, why shouldn't it? You know, there's like I say, there's so many people in the world, and we're all very, very different. And there's some of us that are very, very similar, but we're all very, very different. So why should anybody feel as though their difference is more of a difference or less of a difference than somebody else's difference? Well, it sounds like I'm speaking in riddles there, so apologies, but hopefully you can kind of understand kind of what I'm talking about. From an allyship perspective, absolutely. I think the more we can try and celebrate those differences, whatever they might be, whether they are, the fact that someone is hard of hearing or deaf or any other kind of, I suppose, disability, if we go back to that word, just celebrating the differences. I think differences is just the beauty of the world that we live in. And I think let's try and celebrate more of that.
And of course, there are sports where sport is a fairly gender diverse area and actually can be gender divisive, I guess. But I mean, wheelchair rugby, men and women play together. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. I see Claudia nodding. I'll jump to you, Claudia. I mean, there's got to be an added level of inclusion through that element, and does that help perhaps the mental health side of it? There are more people. There are less barriers to the sort of individuals that could be playing together.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I came from a mixed sport before I became a wheelchair user, but I mean, yeah, as a kid, it was kind of, you were streamed into women's sport and men's sport, and it's nice to come together in that environment, because like people have like different strengths and different weaknesses, and actually, there's always the like how men deal with things, differently to maybe how women, stereotyping. But I think being in that environment, it gives everyone the opportunity to sort of learn and help. I mean, I came to wheelchair rugby not long after I became a wheelchair user, and was still kind of generally struggling to not necessarily accept it, but just know what to do. And actually, you just meet people that have been through that experience, and you just learn to accept your disability more, and also everyone there's in the same boat. So whereas day to day you have to explain your disability on, if you're filling out a form, it always says, well, what disability, talk to us more about your disability. Whereas you go there and everyone's like, oh, you're in a wheelchair, come on, what you're not any different. And I think that's really important. It definitely helped me mentally, and I think it like sport generally obviously just is good. But and also, I mean, the thing about wheelchair rugby, as a wheelchair user, but I'm assuming it extends wider in sort of disability, is that you're generally wrapped in cotton wool, is what I found. Like people, if you're going towards a door, someone's going to run past you to open that door for you because they don't think you're going to do it, or they'll come up and push you behind. But you go to wheelchair rugby, you're put in a rugby chair and you're just allowed to smash into each other. I mean, it's almost madness, and people watching are like, oh, are they okay? Like, should they be doing that? Like, to the sort of untrained eye. But yeah, you just have this freedom, and it doesn't matter if you've got a disability. I mean, obviously, but like that just goes out the window. You don't have a disability when you're there just playing a sport.
Yeah, I was. I went to a murder ball dinner several years ago, and most of the players I met were absolute nut jobs. I have to say, it was, but it was great, and it is a fantastic sport. I mean, Kylie. I think the link. Mike Brown, I think, has been a wheelchair rugby ambassador, hasn't he? How important do you find allyship? How important do you find, perhaps on your side, the role model element?
Yeah, so the allyship is massive. I love it when you get able-bodied people. We've had the England rugby boys come down and get in the chairs and play, and for them to actually say to us, wow, that is like so hard work on the shoulders and what we actually do, and they were absolutely shattered after 15 minutes. And we play for 6 hours a day when we're training. So for them to come and get involved and see what we do. But again, like for all of them, and anyone who's able-bodied who comes and sees the sport, like it's just amazing that they realise, actually just how hard we work and what we do, because forget about the disabilities and everything we have to deal with that on a daily basis. We are like athletes, and I think since London 2012 especially, we are really being seen now as athletes, whereas we weren't before. So to have them all come down and realise, how hard we're working and how hard the sport is, it's pretty amazing. And Yeah, I love getting everyone involved, and then if they go away feeling more comfortable about being around wheelchair users, how to talk to us, you know, all of that sort of thing, then I'm game for it all the time, because that's basically what I want. I want able-bodied people to feel as comfortable as around me as they are any of their mates, really.
Yeah, okay.
Obviously not in a jokey way, so they'd go up to every wheelchair user and say something offensive, but I want them to be comfortable in my presence. I don't want them to feel like, oh, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, of course. Fabulous. Well, we've got about 7-8 minutes left of the hour, so we can take another couple of questions from anyone who has them. We have a couple to get to. Jamie's question, we sort of touched on some of it earlier, but perhaps one of you can pop up a mitt to let me know if you're keen to answer this. Jamie says, question for the panel: when we discuss language around disability, we tend to focus on physical disability and what is and is not appropriate in context. Working with learning disability within junior wheelchair rugby and mixed ability rugby, would that context of language change yet again around participants that can take your words literally and more directly? So it's a mouthful. Who wants to get in there? Claudia's unmuted. Go for him.
I think, as with always, so I have like a learning disability as well, as a physical disability, and obviously that's something I've had all my life. So before I became a wheelchair user, I think with juniors it's different. You have to gauge. I mean, with everyone, you don't go up to them and the first thing you say to them is something, you know, about their disability, or, you know, a joke about their disability, because you don't know where that person is. And if you're in that junior environment, so for those that don't know, junior wheelchair rugby is a bit different from senior wheelchair rugby. You can have learning disabilities to play that, whereas at senior level that you can't. So I think you learn you learn to the individuals, you know where they are with their individuals. And in terms of, you know, people taking things literally, I completely understand. And I think, yeah, it's just about you know that person, and maybe you'll consider that in that context. It's definitely different at seniors because you're just adults and you just take the piss out of each other. But I think at junior level, when you're in that position, it's very different.
Anyone else want to jump in there?
Yeah, Nick, I think just going off the back of what Claudia is saying, I think, you know, as I kind of touched on before, it's a great question from Jamie, but I think the whole point of context is exactly that. You know, things can't be, you know, in one situation versus the next situation, two things the same. You know, so that the context of my mates, you know, having a laugh and a joke at me in a non-derogatory way about my lack of hearing, as an example, when I miss a call or something, is very, very different to, you know, a different context where it's meant in a very different way. So I think, you know, we've touched on that word quite a lot, but I think the context is so important. And again, two people with the same disability or the same level of disability may have a very different perspective on how their disability affects them. So someone who's also, you know, half deaf or hard of hearing may take something quite literally when I maybe take it with a pinch of salt. So yeah, I think context is just so important.
Excellent. We've had another question which has come through from Liam through the Q&A box. It's an interesting one. This weekend we'll see football go offline regarding online abuse. Do the panel feel there is a value in doing this? And how do the panel think that sport can tackle online disability abuse? Any thoughts on this? Go on, Mike.
I think it is worth doing, but only as a first step that's backed up by much bigger things. So obviously the reason it's happening this week is around racism. And I think football, and I can pan these NGBs because I've got no affiliation with them. So the FA, UEFA and FIFA need to be so much harder on racism. And you saw it recently with Rangers. A player was openly and quite aggressively racially abused on the pitch, and he got a 10-game ban. I mean, what message does that send out? Racism is a no-go until it happens, in which case we might deal with it and we might not. So that's why I struggle from a purely footballing context that they're going to do a 4-day social media blackout, because unless that is underpinned by much stronger action from the governing bodies in the form of sanctions. And when I say sanctions, you're talking half-season bans, season bans for that sort of behaviour. I don't understand how anyone could ever rationalise that sort of behaviour. It's not like in a football tackle where you've lost your emotions have got ahead of you and you've tried to tackle someone really hard and you've caused a serious injury. That's awful, and by all means you should have a long ban, a 10-game ban. But going up to someone and racially abusing them, or in this case, abusing them about their disability, that is targeted, vindictive, and it's disgusting behaviour. And I don't understand how football can ever rationalise it. And I think there was one where it was a UEFA event, and they had the head of the Italian FA sat there, and I think it might have been Yaya Toure, I think it was Yaya Toure, essentially questioned, or he was on the panel actually, and he asked the Italian FA lead in the audience. It was a panel for racism, and they're there listening, and by all means, I'm sure they'll have ticked the box of, oh yeah, we were there, we were represented. But racism, particularly in the league that season, had been endemic. It was happening week in, week out, and nothing was being done about it. So from my point of view, that's what I think about the online version. But in terms of how you would stop it, I think it is about raising awareness. I think there's a variety of things that Kylie's talked about, the impact that the Olympics have had around disability, and people starting to foster a greater understanding of individuals and equally a greater respect. I think there can be this sort of weird animosity that, oh, you don't actually deserve to be put on this pedestal, because even if you've won whatever event it may be in the Paralympics or participated, they don't see them as an elite athlete, whereas they are. So from my point of view, raising awareness is by far the biggest thing, and that comes from every level. That comes from parents, governing bodies, clubs. It's a really difficult one to say this is how we would fix it.
Yeah. I can see that we're approaching 8 o'clock. I've just got a couple more bits. Michael O'Regan has just contributed. From a mixed ability point of view, I think you learn about what you can say to individual people quite quickly. Some will cope with certain statements better than others, but that's true of any team, which I can see you're all nodding and agreeing with. We've got another question from Sam, which may be to you, Mike, but happy for anyone to jump in. And then what I'd like to do is just come around each of you to close off. And I think for anybody that might be joining the webinar and is working in sport or running sports teams, any of that kind of thing, and isn't quite sure how best to cope with anybody that may have a disability who's looking to access the sport or to be included, perhaps what you might say based on what we've discussed on language and inclusion as to actually what are the simple things that can make anybody that has a disability feel instantly more included. Then that would be really interesting, I think, and perhaps quite useful. So let's just get Sam's question in first, which is, how well do you think professional rugby teams communicate together in terms of disability and mixed ability sport? So the sort of rugby and mixed ability, which seems to fall to you, Mike.
I think it varies, and I'm not going to name any names because I will name the Quins, though, as one of the good ones. So Quins Foundation have a really strong relationship with Surrey Chargers, where Michael Regan's previous question is from. They've done it right. They've got a really good understanding of what mixed ability rugby is. They understand it's that just another team ethos within the club, and the third half, if you will, so the socialising after, is just as important as the time on the pitch. And because of that, it's a successful, sustainable team. I think some other Premiership clubs, and again, I won't name names, I think have fallen into the trap of viewing mixed ability rugby as disability sport. I've known instances where mixed ability teams, essentially all adult teams who play contact rugby, have arrived for a fixture organised by the Premiership Foundation in question, and it's been against a bunch of under-10s playing tag. Now that sends out completely the wrong message, because it essentially equates a bunch of lads who are over 18 who want to go and play contact rugby and have a few drinks with their mates, and then sends them down to play tag rugby with kids. Now, it wasn't done from a negative place. That is an understanding thing where I think they've just fallen into a bit of a common pitfall of, this is what inclusion is. We're ensuring that they are being included. We're ensuring they're playing, but they maybe haven't given it the level of thought of, is this what they want to be playing? And like I say, I'm certainly not panning Premiership foundations, because lots, if not most of them, and all of them do good work in certain areas. I think it's just particularly around mixed ability, it requires an understanding of what it is. And just a couple of foundations maybe could do with a little bit of work there, but equally it may just be that they need to reframe what they're doing, because they're doing some fantastic work around disability and around creating specific disability sessions for kids. But I think they might maybe use mixed ability because talking of language, it's quite a safe way of saying disability, but that's not what the mixed ability format and concept is. Mixed ability is it's mixed. That's the point. It's a mixture of levels of rugbying ability. Yeah. Whereas I think people, again, it's that I don't want to say disability because I might get it wrong. But if I say mixed ability, that doesn't sound quite so bad. So yeah, I think there's work to be done, but equally there's so many examples of positive work that's being done by Prem foundations. Then yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Well, the sort of the education and the language piece still coming into it, really, there, isn't it? Yeah. And look, this may be a very general and almost big question to feel like I'm finishing with here in terms of what can sport do to make disabled people feel more included. From, I appreciate that can be from attending sporting occasions to participating, that kind of thing. But I've kept it broad because you each may have your own thing to bring to it. So perhaps a closing thought from each of you based on what we've discussed over the last hour. Luke, I'll come to you first. How do you feel that sport can make disabled people feel more included?
Yeah, I think it's one of those. Trying to think of a short answer. It's one of those things whereby there's always more that can be done. I think there's no you don't ever get to the kind of end of the road with it. Whether it's kind of disability inclusion, or whatever. I think there's always it's a constant process where always more can be done. It's almost like growth mindset, thought process of we're never quite there, because things always change as well. So I think the more awareness that can be placed upon the topic and the subject is the better. Obviously funding's all, we haven't touched upon funding at all really in the hour. Funding is a crucial aspect that often lots of programs can live or quite often, particularly in the last 12 months, die by. So the more kind of awareness and funding that can be placed upon upon the topic, I think the better.
Great, thank you very much. Let me come to you, Claudia.
I think for people to remember that, like, first and foremost, like, everyone with a disability is a person. Like, they're just a person who has maybe additional requirements. And I just want to be treated like a person. I'm not a wheelchair, as I sometimes get called when I use public transport. The wheelchair needs to get off. I'm a person, and I use my wheelchair instead of my legs because I can't use my legs. So it is a part of me, because equally people that say, oh, I don't see your disability, I just treat you as you, I don't see your wheelchair, you're almost saying as well that you're not seeing maybe the additional requirements that I might need. I will need a ramp. And, if you want to get to equality and also about, equity, I need those changes to be able to live an equal life. So you need to see the disability, but you see the person before you see the disability and what you need to do to provide those to make it equal.
Yeah, excellent. Well said. Kylie?
Yeah, my point kind of follows on from Claudia's as well, to be honest, that it's such a broad subject, this we could go on for hours, but like small to finish. The best clubs I've ever been to with a range of sports, we're talking football, netball, rugby, is just including that person, whatever, just find a way. Like I've been to some in the past where it's been horrific and they've just put that person on the side because they don't know how to deal with them. And that's not the answer. They're not included at all. So people just need to have a bit more education, a bit more awareness, and just get them involved, include them, talk to them like they're a person. They are a normal person. I hate to use the word normal, but we are all the same. You can talk to them exactly the same, and just include them, find a way around it, think outside the box, and just include them with it along with everybody else. You don't need to put them to the side or seclude them from everyone. That's about it, really.
Yeah, excellent. And finally, Mike.
conscious that I do run on a bit, so I'll keep it succinct. But the ethos we play to in mixed ability rugby is tackle who needs to be tackled. So if you've got everyone wants to play contact rugby and mixed ability rugby. If they're big and they're running at you hard, by all means smash them to the ground if you can. If they're a bit smaller or maybe a bit more tentative, they still want to be tackled to the ground, but in a more tentative way. That's the ethos of mixed ability rugby. Now that translates outside off the pitch. So I would say the area of EDI, not just disability, but can be really overwhelming of, oh, we're not doing this, we're not doing this, we're not doing this, and people just don't engage. What I would say, and I'd say this to every club that I go to when I work with them, is just tackle what needs to be tackled in terms of the issues. So if they go to a club and they identify that the issue is, well, we don't know what we're doing, well, that's the first issue you need to tackle then. So we'll do some awareness training with you. They get out onto the pitch and they get an individual that they don't know, they haven't met before, and they might have a disability that they've got no experience with as a coach. Get to know them, tackle the issue that needs to be tackled with that. And once you've done that, after you've done that a few times, you'll find yourself so much further down the road and doing stuff that you never thought you were able to do. And equally, you've created an environment where you are an inclusive club. And the swimming and definition is the Miller and Katz one that we like to use. And essentially it says it's a sense of belonging. If you can get that into a club, and that's a relatively easy one to try and tell people, try and just make people feel welcome. If they can do that, then they're already well on their way to becoming an inclusive club, regardless of disability, regardless of them being a member of the LGBT plus community. It's just that sense of belonging. So yeah, that's what I would like to see.
Yeah. Excellent stuff. Really, really great thoughts from you all. And look, huge thanks for your honesty, which I think has been really important in the insights that you've had and the experiences that you've had. I've certainly learned a great deal, and I hope that those of you watching have as well. It's been a really interesting hour. So perhaps everybody can join me in thanking Kylie Grimes, Mike Hawkes, Claudia Burrough, and Luke Cheyne. Our next webinar will be related to mental health on the 10th of May. And thanks, of course, to the Harlequins Foundation, the tireless James Swanson, who does so much fantastic work. And yeah, thank you all for attending.
Just from our end, thank you so much to our panelists, Luke, Mike, Kylie and Claudia. Thank you as always, Nick, for helping us build this series. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in this evening. Two things from us. As Nick mentioned, we have 2 panel discussions in May covering mental health, but also race and ethnicity. And tomorrow you will receive a post-event survey, so please fill that out alongside the recording, just in case you missed the beginning or would like to watch it again, as this wonderful resource for tonight's was. So have a lovely evening, everyone, and see you at the next event. Goodbye.
Thanks all. Take care. Cheerio.